Imagine waking up one morning to discover that everyone around you seems to have lost their grip on reality. Not just eccentric behavior, not mere quirks of personality, but a chilling disconnection from logic, reason, and even basic self-awareness. You try to speak, to make sense of it, but every word feels like it's swallowed by a sea of blank stares or hostile certainty. What's more disturbing is the creeping realization. This isn't a dream, and you can't simply wake up. This is the world you live in, a world that behaves as if hypnotized, where truth feels forbidden, and illusion is treated as sacred. The thought is terrifying. What if you are not the one who is insane? What if you are the only one still sane, wandering through a world that has surrendered to madness? History has whispered this possibility before. In medieval chronicles, there were stories of entire towns that believed they were cursed, dancing frenziedly in the streets until exhaustion overcame them. In 17th century Germany, women believed themselves possessed by demons, convulsing in collective hysteria, while priests interpreted it as divine punishment. To the outsider, it looked absurd. To those inside, it was reality itself. This is the essence of what modern psychologists call mass psychosis, condition not limited to individuals, but to societies, nations, even civilizations. It is the moment when reason fractures, when entire groups slip into the comforting embrace of delusion, blind obedience, and fear-driven conformity. A society in a state of mass psychosis does not think, it reacts. It does not weigh truth, it repeats. And in that repetition, illusion becomes indistinguishable from reality. But how does this happen? Why does it happen? And most urgently, how can one escape it? These are not abstract questions. They are survival questions, because history has shown us, again and again, that civilizations do not collapse only because of invaders, famine, or fire. They often collapse from within, eroded by their own myths, blinded by their own illusions, and destroyed by their own collective madness. In the next moments, we will venture into uncomfortable territory. We will uncover the truth of how mass psychosis forms, why it thrives in the cracks of uncertainty, and why those who resist it are so often treated as traitors rather than visionaries. You'll learn how societies can be seduced by hypnotic lies, how fear becomes the architect of obedience, and most importantly, how you can resist the undertow of a world gone mad. Stay with this story until the end, because the final revelation is not only the most powerful, it may change the way you see everything: your society, your friends, and even yourself. This journey will not be easy. It will ask you to question the voices you trust, the beliefs you repeat, and even the very shape of your reality. But consider this: if illusions are chains, then truth, even painful truth, is the only key. Let us begin. Let us begin with a brutal truth. Human beings are not as rational as we like to believe. Despite our access to science, philosophy, and centuries of historical lessons, we often behave not as enlightened thinkers, but as frightened animals chasing shadows. We pride ourselves on logic, yet time and again, we follow illusions. Entire empires have collapsed, not from the swords of their enemies, but from the weight of their own fantasies. Consider Rome. Its decline was not a single cataclysm, but a slow decay of reason. Senators bickered while bread and circuses pacified the masses. Rumors, prophecies, and conspiracies spread like wildfire. Instead of unity, paranoia reigned, and the empire consumed itself from within. Or look at the witch trials in Europe and colonial America: villages, torn apart not by plague alone, but by the fever dream that neighbors were in league with Satan. The enemy was not an external army, but the collective imagination, weaponized by fear. This pattern is not new. The French philosopher Descartes, writing in the 17th century, warned that our senses could deceive us, that the very way we experience the world could lead us astray. Yet even he could not have foreseen the scale at which entire societies could deceive themselves. The delusion is no longer personal, it becomes cultural, embedded in language, rituals, and institutions. Today, psychologists give this phenomenon a modern name: mass formation psychosis. It describes the state in which large groups of people lose touch with reality, enthralled instead by stories, symbols, and narratives that may have little to do with truth. In this condition, emotion rules over evidence. Entire nations can be swept away by the conviction that their destiny depends on defeating invisible enemies, whether they are witches, heretics, communists, or the other. But what triggers this collapse of reason? Why do intelligent individuals, capable of reflection, surrender their judgment so willingly to the roar of the crowd? To answer this, we must turn to the mind itself, to the moments when meaning is lost, and the self, untethered, seeks refuge in the herd. That, as we will see, is where mass delusion truly begins. Carl Jung, the great psychiatrist, warned of a dangerous truth about the human psyche. When cut off from meaning, purpose, or spiritual anchoring, the mind becomes fragile, unmoored, and ready to latch onto anything that promises belonging. An individual who does not know who they are will look to the herd for identity. And the herd, Jung noted, is rarely wise. It is driven by fear, propaganda, and the intoxicating safety of numbers. Think of the void modern society creates. For centuries, religion, tradition, and local communities provided people with identity and direction. A farmer in medieval Europe did not wonder where he belonged. His place was dictated by faith, family, and the soil beneath his feet. But as societies shifted, as faith fractured, and communities dissolved under industrial and now digital life, individuals found themselves increasingly isolated. And with isolation came hunger for meaning, for identity, for a place to belong. That hunger is fertile ground for manipulation. When people feel lost, they cling to any voice that speaks with certainty. When they feel powerless, they adopt slogans like shields. Jung understood that this craving for the collective does not make individuals freer, it makes them vulnerable. They stop listening to their inner voice and begin echoing the voice of the crowd. We see this vividly in our time. Social media has become a modern village square, but one amplified to a deafening roar. Every day, millions repeat slogans they scarcely understand. They champion causes they have never studied. They attack strangers with venom not because they know the truth, but because they fear exclusion. To belong, they trade away their independence of thought. And so the question arises, is this progress or collapse? We have access to more information than any generation before us, yet we live in an age where the loudest voices drown out the wisest. The very tools meant to enlighten us instead entangle us in endless cycles of outrage. Jung would not be surprised. He warned that a society cut off from meaning, starved of purpose, would not evolve into enlightened individuals. It would regress into a frightened mass, susceptible to suggestion, eager to obey. More than a century ago, the French social psychologist Gustave Le Bon wrote a book that remains disturbingly relevant today, The Crowd. In it, he described how an individual, once absorbed into a mass, is no longer the same person. Responsibility fades, critical thinking dissolves, and what remains is something primitive, impulsive, and strangely childlike. The individual in a crowd, Le Bon argued, ceases to reason as an adult. Instead, they are swept up in emotion, suggestion, and imitation. A crowd does not weigh evidence, it reacts. It does not deliberate, it surges. And just like a child, it can be coaxed, frightened, or distracted with astonishing ease. History provides endless examples of this regression. During the French Revolution, rational debate in the National Assembly gave way to mobs storming the streets, chanting for blood. In Salem, Massachusetts, ordinary townsfolk transformed into hysterical accusers, convinced that witches walked among them. More recently, financial bubbles have gripped entire nations, men and women, investing fortunes not because they calculated risks, but because everyone else was doing it. When the bubble bursts, the same crowd that shouted with euphoria now weeps with despair. The danger lies here. When people are swept into a collective frenzy, they become easier to control. They outsource their judgment to external authorities, whether it be a charismatic leader, the media, or the faceless tide of popular trends. They accept what they are told, not because they have examined it, but because it feels safe to agree. And in this, we see the great paradox of the crowd. Individuals enter it, seeking strength in numbers, but in reality, they surrender strength. They trade away their independence, their maturity, and their clarity of thought for the illusion of belonging. In the crowd, the rational adult dissolves, leaving behind an emotional child quick to rage, quick to fear, quick to obey. If there is one force that fuels mass delusion more than any other, it is fear. Fear is the accelerant that transforms ordinary confusion into collective hysteria. When fear is introduced, logic crumbles, and the herd moves as one. Leaders throughout history, whether knowingly or instinctively, have exploited this primal reaction to steer entire populations. Consider the medieval crusades. Fear of eternal damnation, fear of the infidel. Fear of God's wrath was woven into sermons, until men marched thousands of miles to kill strangers they had never met. Or take the witch trials of early modern Europe. Women accused under the thinnest of suspicions, communities convinced that the devil himself stalked their homes. Panic spread like wildfire, and to question it was to risk being accused yourself. The pattern repeats in every century. In the 20th century, fear of economic collapse pushed citizens into the arms of authoritarian regimes promising order. Fear of foreign enemies fueled wars that devoured generations. Even in our own time, fear has been used to justify sweeping surveillance, censorship, and extraordinary controls, all embraced not with reflection, but with trembling obedience. And here lies the most insidious part. Those trapped in mass psychosis do not believe themselves deceived. They believe themselves righteous. They believe that youth, the doubter, the skeptic, the one who questions are, the one who has lost touch with reality. The inversion is chilling. Suddenly, curiosity is labeled as danger. Skepticism is heresy. Silence becomes safer than truth. This is how societies suffocate. When fear is weaponized, it is not merely an emotional tool, it becomes a leash, tightening round the collective mind. People no longer ask, "Is this true?" They ask only, "What must I do to be safe?" And in that moment, freedom dies, not with a shout, but with a whisper of compliance. How does one break free from this suffocating net of mass delusion? The first step is always awareness. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, if we do not recognize the invisible forces pulling at our minds, we will mistake them for destiny. Mass psychosis thrives not on intelligence, but on passivity and silence, on blind conformity, on the refusal to question. When people stop asking why, when they stop probing the foundations of their beliefs, the spell tightens. It is not stupidity that sustains collective madness, it is comfort. The comfort of going along, of avoiding conflict, of letting others do the thinking. Have you noticed how difficult it has become to have deep, rational conversations in today's world? A simple question can be met with mockery instead of an answer. Dissent is labeled as hate. Those who present inconvenient truths are met, not with curiosity, but with resistance and hostility. Societies that once praised debate, now punish it. This is no accident. A culture that has surrendered to illusion cannot tolerate the questioner, because the question is more dangerous than any answer. To ask why is to poke holes in the fragile fabric of collective belief. And when that fabric tears, fear seeps out. Thus, the heretic is silenced not because they are wrong, but because they remind the crowd of what it desperately tries to ignore. And yet, this escape into illusion is seductive. It offers belonging, it offers safety, it offers identity at the price of truth. The cost is high, but for many, it feels easier than standing alone. That is why awareness must begin not with grand gestures, but with a small, quiet rebellion. The courage to notice, to pause, to ask. It may feel insignificant, but in a climate where silence has become complicity, the smallest question is an act of defiance. It is the first crack in the spell. To understand why mass psychosis spreads so easily, we must look deeper into something ancient: the primal fear of exclusion. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a tribe. To be cast out was not just humiliating, it was a death sentence. Alone on the savannah, a human could not fight off predators, find food, or withstand enemies. The instinct to conform was wired into our very bones. That instinct still rules us today. We no longer fear lions in the tall grass, but we fear the sting of ridicule, the icy silence of social rejection, the humiliation of being the one who does not applaud when everyone else is clapping. The body responds to exclusion as though it were a mortal wound. Neuroscientists have shown that the brain registers social rejection in the same regions that register physical pain. To disagree with the group is to bleed invisibly. Psychologist Solomon Asch revealed just how powerful this pressure is in his famous 1950s conformity experiments. Volunteers were shown a set of lines and asked a simple question: which lines matched in length? The answer was obvious, so obvious that a child could see it. Yet when actors planted in the group deliberately gave the wrong answer, the real participants, under the crushing weight of peer pressure, also gave the wrong answer. Again and again, people denied the evidence of their own eyes simply to fit in. Now imagine that pressure multiplied across millions, amplified by television, by newspapers, and today, by the relentless echo chambers of social media. To stand apart feels unbearable. To conform feels safe, even when the truth is sacrificed. A lie, repeated by the many, begins to taste more comforting than a truth whispered by the few. This is how mass psychosis begins, not with grand tyrants or monstrous lies, but with ordinary people too afraid to be the odd one out. Fear of exclusion drives obedience, and obedience, repeated enough times, builds a prison strong enough to hold an entire society. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once remarked, "Madness is rare in individuals but in groups, parties, nations, and ages, it is the rule." He saw what history so often confirms, that the crowd, once intoxicated by belief, is capable of greater delusion than any single mind. This truth is unsettling. We tend to think of insanity as personal, a tragedy of the isolated, but more often it is collective. It is not the lone madman who is most dangerous, it is the crowd that believes itself sane. When entire nations surrender to illusion, when mobs howl for blood or leaders cloak lies as destiny, the results are catastrophic. Consider the spectacle of the Nazi rallies in Nuremberg. Tens of thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, chanting in perfect unison, their individuality dissolved into a single roar. To the outsider, it was terrifying. To those inside, it was exhilarating. The truth was not only silenced, it was drowned beneath a sea of certainty. Or recall the Cultural Revolution in China, when students, whipped into frenzy, turned against teachers and parents, convinced they were serving history. The madness of the group justified cruelty the individual might never have dared. And here lies the danger. When individuals abandon their own thinking, they rarely become neutral. They often become aggressive. A person caught in mass delusion does not merely ignore truth, they fight against it. Reason, when calmly presented, is received not with gratitude, but with rage, mockery, or censorship. The truth does not wound them because it is wrong, it wounds them because it threatens the fragile illusion that holds their identity together. This is why you will often see an educated man, adorned with titles and degrees, lash out with the same fury as a frightened child when confronted with evidence that shatters his worldview. Intelligence without awareness is like a ship without a compass. It may sail swiftly, but in the wrong direction. The tragedy of our age is not ignorance, but educated confusion. Information is everywhere, but wisdom is scarce. Facts are abundant, but clarity is rare. People know what to think, but not how to think. And in this fog of unreason, consensus is mistaken for truth, and compliance for virtue. A society built on such fragile ground does not merely wobble, it teeters on the edge of collapse. Modern society, for all its advancements, is not built to foster critical thought, it is built to distract. Our schools teach memorization, not reflection. Our media feeds us a steady diet of emotions, not facts. Social media, with its endless scrolling and sensationalism, rewards outrage, not wisdom. The architecture of our daily lives has been designed not to encourage thinking, but reacting. Consider the average social media post, crafted to provoke an emotional reaction in a split second. Whether it's a photo of a celebrity scandal or a political firestorm, the goal is the same: to seize your attention, to stir your passions, to make you feel something immediately, even if you don't have time to understand why. The consequences of this are far-reaching. As Marshall McLuhan famously said, "The medium is the message." The platforms we use to communicate are not neutral. They shape our perceptions. When every piece of information is designed to provoke, every interaction is designed to elicit a quick emotional response, critical thinking becomes nearly impossible. We are trained not to pause, not to question, but to react, to feel. This is not entirely our fault. We have been conditioned by an environment that values reaction over reflection, consensus over contemplation, emotional engagement over intellectual engagement. Even the very systems that are supposed to educate us often fail to nurture independent thought. Schools, once the breeding grounds of critical thinking, have become factories of standardized tests, pushing students to memorize facts rather than question the world around them. The antidote to this is simple, but difficult. Reclaim your mind. You must build an inner firewall or filter that protects your clarity from being hijacked by the constant noise of the world. It starts with a practice of self-awareness, of questioning assumptions, and of asking yourself, why do I believe this? Who benefits from me believing this? This practice is not just intellectual, it is a spiritual act. It requires you to recognize that you are not your thoughts, and that just because something is repeated often does not make it true. Only when we reclaim our ability to think critically can we begin to break free from the traps that mass psychosis lays. But it requires courage, the courage to stand apart, to question, and yes, to be ridiculed for doing so. It is a path that, though difficult, leads to the greatest freedom, the freedom of the mind. One of the most dangerous things you can do in today's world is question the crowd. It sounds simple, but in practice, it is one of the most radical acts you can undertake. To question the crowd is to step outside of the comfort of collective belief, to place yourself in opposition to the shared narrative, and to risk being alienated, ridiculed, or worse. But this act of questioning is not merely a rebellious gesture. It is an act of individual sovereignty. When you question the crowd, you question everything that defines your place in society, your relationships, your job, your reputation. You are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about your own beliefs and the reasons behind them. For many, this is too much to bear. It is easier to swallow the collective illusion, to agree with the masses, and to avoid the painful consequences of standing alone. This is why the awakened individual is so often vilified. People who question the dominant narrative are not simply challenging ideas, they are challenging the very foundation of society's comfort. Those who stand apart force others to ask difficult questions about their own lives, and that in turn threatens the fragile structures built on consensus, on belief without evidence, and on the safety of conformity. Carl Jung believed that one of the most dangerous things in life is to follow the crowd while believing you are thinking for yourself. Most of us think we are acting independently, when in reality, we are merely echoing the voices of those around us. We are not truly free. We are simply repeating what we have been told. Like parrots mimicking their masters, the true act of self-liberation, then, is to question these echoes. It is to challenge the assumptions that have been planted in your mind, to recognize when you are parroting beliefs that were not your own, and to ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? That simple question, what if I'm wrong, is the key to breaking free from the collective delusion. It opens the door to the painful but necessary process of cognitive dissonance, the gap between what you've been told and what you experience to be true, the gap between illusion and reality. And as uncomfortable as it is, this is the very process that leads to clarity. To ask what if I'm wrong is to embark on the road to mental freedom. It's not a path that is walked with ease. It requires courage, self-awareness, and an openness to change. But it is the only path that leads to true freedom, the freedom to think for yourself, the freedom to break free from the collective mind. As you begin to awaken from the collective dream, you may notice a deep loneliness that accompanies this shift. This loneliness is not a curse, but a rite of passage. It is the price you pay for seeing clearly in a world that has chosen to remain blind. Throughout history, thinkers who have dared to question the dominant narrative have walked this path alone. From Socrates, who was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of Athens with his questions, to Galileo, who faced the threat of torture for asserting that the earth revolved around the sun. Those who saw beyond the illusion have always been isolated. The world did not welcome them, it resisted them. But this loneliness is not a punishment. It is the birthplace of wisdom. For in moments of solitude, the mind finds its true voice. It is the space where you stop hearing the chorus of society and begin to hear your own thoughts, unfiltered and unclouded. It is in this silence that the seeds of clarity are sown. The loneliness of awakening is the price of self-possession. When you begin to see the world clearly, when you begin to question what everyone else accepts, you become a stranger in your own world. You will no longer see things as they are presented to you. You will begin to see them as they truly are, with all their complexities, contradictions, and imperfections. And yet, this loneliness is not something to be feared. It is in this very solitude that you will find the clarity and strength to break free from the illusions of the crowd. The path may be isolating, but it leads to a deeper understanding of yourself and the world around you. You will be tempted to turn back, to retreat into the comfort of the herd. But remember, every great thinker, every individual who has ever led a true revolution, whether in philosophy, science, or politics, has had to face this moment of solitude. They have had to stand alone, even when the world around them raged in opposition. This is your moment. The questions you ask now will shape the rest of your journey. The loneliness you feel now is the first step towards mental sovereignty. the freedom to think for yourself and reclaim your mind from the forces that seek to control it. And when you emerge from this loneliness, you will discover something profound. You are not truly alone. History is full of those who have walked this path before you. And as you find your voice, you will attract others who are walking it as well. Like-minded individuals, those who also seek truth, who also dare to question, will find you. The true revolution begins not with a loud cry, but with a quiet shift in perspective, and it starts with you. To truly understand the grip of mass psychosis, we must break it down into its stages. The first stage, disorientation, is often subtle. It begins with a vague sense that something is wrong, but no clear idea of what that something is. The world feels chaotic, fractured. People begin to feel helpless, as if they are wandering in a fog, searching for meaning, for order, but unable to find it. This disorientation is not just a passing moment, it becomes a collective feeling, shared by large segments of society. History provides us with vivid examples of this stage. Take, for example, Germany in the early 1930s. The aftermath of the First World War had left the country broken, humiliated, and economically devastated. The sense of disorientation was palpable. The old structures, monarchy, empire, even the Weimar Republic had failed. People felt helpless, lost, and into this vacuum stepped Adolf Hitler, offering a vision, a promise of order, of certainty. The disorientation of the people made them vulnerable to his rhetoric. They were ready to believe anything that could restore a sense of purpose. In this stage, people are no longer questioning the nature of their world. They are simply trying to make sense of it. They crave certainty. They are searching for something, anything, that can provide a sense of stability, even if that something is a dangerous illusion. The next stage is simplification. This is when the fog begins to clear, but only to reveal a distorted vision of reality. A clear enemy appears, and a clear solution is offered. The complexity of the world is erased, and everything becomes black and white. In Russia, before the rise of Stalin, the Bolshevik Revolution promised a new world, one of equality, justice, and hope. But as the revolution was co-opted by fear and paranoia, the complexity of political ideas gave way to a simplistic narrative. Those who were with us were righteous. Those who opposed us were enemies of the state. This stage is crucial because it gives people a simple, emotionally charged narrative to cling to, one that promises to solve all their problems. The media, charismatic leaders, and the state all play a role in this simplification process. A villain is created, often an outsider, someone who can be blamed for society's suffering. The solution is framed as simple and urgent. We must unite against the enemy, for the good of all. Fear is weaponized, and soon the populace no longer sees the complexity of human nature. They only see us versus them, a binary, a battle of good and evil. In this stage, those who resist the narrative are seen as threats, even if they are questioning in good faith. To question the new order is to betray the cause. To ask, "What if we're wrong?" is to risk being branded as a traitor. And so, people begin to silence themselves. The critical thinker becomes an enemy of the state, an obstacle to the simplicity the crowd craves. Simplification is seductive. It promises clarity where there is none, resolution where there is confusion, but it is also dangerous. It strips away the complexity of human nature, reducing the world to caricatures, to stereotypes. The problem with simplification is that it removes the possibility of nuance, of seeing the gray areas where real solutions lie. As we move into the next stage, conformity, the narrative spreads not because everyone believes it, but because everyone thinks everyone else believes it. Society, now governed by fear and a desire for belonging, begins to conform, not because it is fully convinced, but because it fears being the odd one out. This is the stage where true mass psychosis begins to take root. It is no longer about individuals making rational choices. It is about the collective movement, driven by fear and emotional conformity. As the cycle of mass psychosis continues, the next stage is aggression. Once the new belief system has taken root, once the people have conformed, they begin to see any remaining resistance as a threat. It is no longer enough for the crowd to simply believe in the narrative. They must enforce it. Those who resist the story must be silenced, marginalized, or even punished. This stage has played out time and again throughout history. Take the French Revolution, for example. In the beginning, the revolutionaries sought freedom, equality, and fraternity. But as the revolution grew, so did the paranoia. Leaders like Maximilien Robespierre justified the reign of terror, where thousands of citizens were executed or imprisoned simply for being suspected enemies of the revolution. The logic was twisted. Anyone who opposed the new order was not just wrong, but dangerous. They were a threat to the very fabric of society. The same phenomenon occurred during the Cultural Revolution in China. Students were encouraged to denounce their teachers, parents, and even neighbors. Anyone who did not fall in line with Mao's ideology was labeled a counter-revolutionary. As the movement gained momentum, the atmosphere of fear grew suffocating. The aggressors were not just the state or the leaders, they were the people themselves, attacking one another in the name of a cause that they had been manipulated into believing was righteous. This aggression is not just external, it is internalized. The conformity becomes so strong that those who are not aligned with the new narrative become internal enemies. Their very existence a challenge to the collective belief. The psychology of the mob takes hold. When everyone is demanding conformity, anyone who stands apart is seen as a betrayer. This stage is marked by censorship and persecution. The media no longer serves as a platform for debate, it becomes an instrument of control. Books are burned, ideas are banned, and any dissent is silenced, often violently. The danger is not just the physical harm inflicted on individuals, but the deeper psychological effect, the creation of a culture of fear. People no longer speak their truth, because to do so would mean risking everything. It is at this point that mass psychosis has fully taken root. The fear of the other, of the outsider, of the nonconformist, has reached such a fever pitch that reason and dialogue have no place. The fight is no longer about ideas, it is about survival. To challenge the narrative is to risk losing one's status, one's friends, even one's life. The truth has become irrelevant. What matters is the loyalty to the collective delusion. But, as history shows, this stage cannot last forever. The weight of the lie eventually breaks through. Contradictions begin to emerge. The promises made by the leaders, the promises made by the crowd, begin to collapse under their own weight. The empire built on deception begins to crumble. When this happens, a new phase begins, awakening. But this awakening is rarely smooth or painless. It is often painful, and the disillusionment can be profound. The realization that one has been part of a mass delusion is not easy to face, but awakening, painful as it may be, is the key to breaking free from the grip of mass psychosis. The lie can only sustain itself as long as people are willing to believe it. Once they see the truth, once the illusion is shattered, the spell is broken. The question is, will enough people wake up before it is too late? Amid the chaos of mass delusion, it's easy to feel powerless, but history offers us a profound lesson in resilience. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychoanalyst and Holocaust survivor, wrote in his book Man's Search for Meaning that those who survived the brutalities of the Nazi concentration camps were not necessarily the strongest, the most physically fit, or the most powerful. No, they were the ones who had found meaning in their suffering. Frankl observed that those who survived had something deeply rooted within them, a purpose, a belief, something that transcended the chaos of their external circumstances. In the darkest of times, when everything else had been stripped away, their inner sense of purpose was what kept them alive. In the modern world, this lesson is just as urgent. The external pressures of mass psychosis, the constant bombardment of fear, propaganda, and societal pressure threaten to strip us of our inner clarity. Without a sense of meaning, we too risk becoming lost, drifting along with the crowd, swept up in a tide of mindless conformity. But like Frankl's survivors, we have the power to anchor ourselves in something deeper. This is not just a philosophical notion, it is a psychological imperative. Meaning becomes our shield, our compass in the storm. In the face of overwhelming societal forces, it is the meaning we create for ourselves that will determine whether we remain grounded or become swept away. To awaken from mass psychosis, we must first find meaning not just in the world around us, but within ourselves. This meaning can come from many places: philosophy, art, spirituality, nature, or our relationships. What matters is that it is something deeply rooted in our own sense of purpose, something that cannot be easily manipulated by the shifting winds of popular opinion. The path to mental and spiritual freedom begins with reclaiming this sense of purpose. It requires a commitment to truth, to self-awareness, and to the courage to stand in the face of adversity. It may be lonely at times, and it may bring pain, but this pain is the birth of something greater, a true, sovereign self. unshackled by the illusions of the herd. As we move forward in the fight against mass psychosis, remember this: the greatest antidote to fear is not the denial of danger, but the affirmation of meaning. When you know why you stand, when you have anchored your identity in something deeper than the crowd's ever-shifting whims, you become impervious to the tides of mass delusion. In the end, purpose is not just a survival mechanism, it is the path to freedom. And it is only through finding our own purpose that we can transcend the collective madness that seeks to control us. Reclaiming your mind from the tide of mass psychosis is no easy task. It requires both practical strategies and deep personal commitment. It's not a matter of simply recognizing the delusion around you. It's about taking actionable steps to protect yourself from the forces that seek to manipulate you. Here are some powerful tools for achieving mental sovereignty: the ability to think for yourself without being swayed by external forces. First, learn to embrace silence. Not the silence of avoidance or ignorance, but the silence of inner observation. Take time each day to sit quietly and observe your thoughts without judgment. In the stillness, you will begin to hear your true voice, uncensored by the noise of the outside world. This practice is rooted in both Stoicism and Buddhism, where silence is seen as the gateway to wisdom. When you observe your thoughts without reacting to them, you begin to gain distance from them. You see them for what they are, not necessarily true, but simply passing mental events. In a world that never stops talking, silence is the most radical act. It allows you to separate yourself from the endless chatter of social media, the sensationalism of news cycles, and the collective hysteria that demands your participation. When you embrace silence, you reclaim your ability to think critically. Second, work on reducing your emotional reactivity. Mass psychosis thrives on triggered minds, people who react to emotions, headlines, and social pressure without thinking. The more reactive you are, the easier it is for others to manipulate you. Ask yourself why certain things trigger you. Why does that post make you angry? Why does that comment make you afraid? Emotional discipline is not about suppression, it's about sovereignty. Being aware of your emotional reactions gives you the power to choose your responses. Instead of immediately jumping into outrage or fear, you can pause, reflect, and ask, is this reaction based on truth, or is it a manipulation of my emotions? This practice will free you from the control that emotional manipulation has over you. Third, reconnect with meaning. In a world that thrives on distraction, it is crucial to find a source of meaning that transcends the chaos. Whether through philosophy, spirituality, nature, or art, find something that gives your life purpose. The key to surviving in a world gone mad is to anchor your mind in something that is not dependent on public opinion or the fleeting whims of the crowd. As Nietzsche famously said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." When you have a deep sense of purpose, you can weather any storm, because no external force can shake the foundation of your beliefs. Meaning is the antidote to fear. When you know why you do what you do, when your actions are aligned with your core values, you are not swayed by external noise. Fourth, build a community, not one of echo chambers, but a community of thinkers. Surround yourself with people who value truth more than comfort, who are willing to question, to debate, and to grow. When the herd moves in one direction, it's easy to lose sight of truth. But a community of independent thinkers can anchor you in reality and provide the support needed to stand firm against the tide. True community does not mean conformity. It means finding others who are also awake, who seek clarity, and who are willing to challenge each other's ideas, even when it's uncomfortable. Alone, we are vulnerable, but together, we can create a stronghold of truth. Finally, prepare for the last revelation. The greatest escape from mass psychosis does not lie in resisting the crowd, but in transcending the need for a crowd altogether. This is the final stage of awakening. When you are no longer dependent on approval, when your sense of self is no longer tied to the collective, you are truly free. This final stage is not about rebellion, it is about inner liberation. It is the ability to walk alone, in clarity, without fear of judgment or exclusion. The true revolutionary is not the one who fights the crowd. It is the one who no longer needs the crowd to validate their existence. By taking these steps, you can protect yourself from the forces of mass psychosis. The path to mental sovereignty is not easy, and it requires commitment and discipline, but it is the only path that leads to true freedom. In the next phase, we will explore how this mental sovereignty leads to personal transformation, and how you, as an individual, can become a beacon of truth in a world lost to illusion. The ultimate escape from mass psychosis does not lie in fighting the crowd. It lies in transcending the need for the crowd altogether. The deepest root of mass delusion is not the fear of truth, but the fear of being alone with the truth. This fear is what holds people in a constant state of denial, constantly seeking external validation, approval, and belonging. When you fear rejection more than you fear falsehood, you choose lies over truth. This is the core of mass psychosis. The illusion that we are only as valuable as the opinions of others. The lie that we are not whole unless we are seen, applauded, or accepted by the crowd. In the end, this need for external validation makes us prisoners of the herd. We are not free because we are constantly seeking permission to be who we are. And this permission is always in the hands of the collective. But to awaken is to break free from this need. It is to realize that your worth is not determined by others' approval, but by your alignment with your own truth. When you no longer need the crowd to validate your existence, you have transcended the illusion. You are no longer a slave to the opinions of others. You are free. In many ancient traditions, enlightenment is not described as blissful, but disruptive. The light of truth does not always feel comfortable. It burns away the layers of illusion, exposing the raw, unhealed parts of ourselves. When we see clearly, we often see not just the world, but the self, the parts of us that we have kept hidden from the world, and even from ourselves. This process is painful, but it is the only way to true freedom. It is the only way to break the chains of mass psychosis. To step away from the crowd is to face the deep loneliness of truth, to confront the void that lies between what you have been told to believe and what you know, deep down, to be real. But this loneliness is not an end, it is a beginning. It is the beginning of true self-possession. When you no longer fear being alone with the truth, when your sense of self is rooted in something deeper than the transient opinions of the crowd, you begin to live a life of integrity. You no longer seek to please, to conform, or to perform. You simply are whole, intact, and unshaken by the storms that rage outside. This is the final escape. It is not about rejecting the world, it is about rejecting the need for the world to define you. When you stop seeking approval, when you stop needing the crowd to validate your existence, you find a deep peace within yourself. You find clarity in a world gone mad. This peace is not passive, it is active. It is the peace of someone who has learned to trust themselves, to trust their own mind, and to trust their own heart. It is the peace of someone who knows that they are enough, just as they are, without the need for external confirmation. In this way, you become the antidote to mass psychosis, not by fighting the crowd, but by transcending the need for the crowd's approval. You become the living proof that it is possible to live in clarity, to stand in truth, even when the world around you is blind to it. This is the path to true freedom, the freedom to walk alone, without fear, without shame, without the need for applause. This is the freedom to be. When you transcend the need for approval, you begin to radiate a different kind of energy. It is the energy of clarity, of coherence, of integrity. This energy is not something that can be faked, not something that can be manufactured. It is a natural byproduct of living in alignment with truth, of walking in the world with a clear, unshakable sense of self. This energy does not depend on social status, credentials, or charisma. It does not depend on external validation or the praise of others. It is the energy of someone who is at peace with themselves, someone who has stopped looking for external sources of affirmation. It is the energy of someone who is not afraid to stand apart from the crowd, because they have realized that their own truth is enough. And this energy is powerful. When you live in clarity, when your thoughts, words, and actions align, people feel it. Some will be drawn to it, others will be threatened by it. But it does not matter, because your peace no longer depends on others' perceptions. You have become a force of nature, grounded in truth and untouchable by the noise of the world. This energy is infectious. It draws others who are seeking the same clarity, the same peace. You will begin to notice that the people around you begin to shift, to question, to seek their own truth. Your example will serve as a silent invitation for others to wake up from their own collective illusions. This is how awakening spreads, not through force, not through argument, but through resonance. When others see you living with clarity, when they see you standing in your truth without fear or compromise, they are drawn to that energy. They will begin to ask themselves, how can I live like that? How can I live in truth, without fear of judgment? But there is a shadow side to this energy. You may notice that some people will resist you, even attack you, not because you are wrong, but because you are a reminder of their own lack of clarity. their own fear of standing apart. The crowd fears what it does not understand, and when it encounters someone who has transcended its need for validation, it feels threatened. The status quo cannot tolerate someone who refuses to conform. However, this resistance is not a reflection of your worth, it is a reflection of their own inner turmoil. Those who are threatened by your clarity are still trapped in the illusions of the crowd, still looking for approval, still tethered to the noise and chaos around them. But the more you live in truth, the more they will begin to question their own lives, their own choices. This is why your inner peace is so revolutionary. You are not fighting against the crowd, you are simply living beyond it. You are showing what is possible when one lives with clarity, integrity, and truth. You are creating a space for others to find their own way out of the collective madness. And in doing so, you become part of something much larger than yourself, an awakening that spreads quietly but powerfully across society. It is from this space, from this clarity and integrity, that true transformation begins. You stop reacting, you start observing, you stop chasing approval, you start seeking alignment with your own truth. And this alignment becomes your greatest source of power. You no longer need to convince others of your worth, because you know it intrinsically. This is the energy of self-mastery, and as you embody it, you will discover that not only does the world start to change around you, but so do you. You will become a living example of what is possible when a person chooses to walk in truth, when they choose to stand apart from the herd, and when they choose to live in the clarity of their own mind and soul. This is the energy that transforms society. This is the energy that mass psychosis fears most. The true rebellion against mass psychosis is not loud, not confrontational. It is quiet. It begins with the individual, the one who chooses to stand in truth, to walk alone, to refuse the comfort of the herd. It is not a rebellion of force, but of presence. When you live authentically, when you walk with clarity and integrity, you become the rebellion. This rebellion does not seek to overthrow the world, it seeks to transform it. It is not about fighting or defeating the crowd. It is about showing up as an individual, rooted in truth, and letting that example speak for itself. The true revolution begins not in the streets, not in loud protests or violent uprisings, but in the quiet moments of personal sovereignty. It begins in the small, often unnoticed acts of defiance, when you choose to question, when you choose to stand alone, when you choose to live beyond the crowd's approval. Throughout history, the greatest figures of change, Socrates, Galileo, Nelson Mandela, and many others, did not fight the crowd with rage or resistance. They simply lived in a way that brought clarity to the darkness around them. Their actions spoke louder than words ever could, and in doing so, they awakened others who were silently waiting for someone to show them the way. This quiet rebellion is contagious. It spreads, not by force, but by resonance. When others see you living with authenticity, living with clarity, they are drawn to that energy. They want to know how you do it, how you stand apart from the noise and chaos of the world. They want to know how you find peace in a world that seems lost. And through this process, the rebellion grows not through violence, but through awakened minds coming together, finding their strength, and choosing truth over comfort. In the face of mass psychosis, the individual who lives in truth is the most powerful force for change. This individual does not need to fight, does not need to preach, does not need to convince anyone. Their presence is enough. They are the living proof that it is possible to live outside the collective delusion. They are the beacon of light in a world gone dark. But this quiet rebellion is not easy. It requires the courage to face loneliness, the courage to stand apart, the courage to question everything. It asks you to let go of the need for external validation, to stop seeking approval from others, and to trust in your own truth. The reward is not fame, not power, but something far more precious: inner peace and the deep satisfaction of knowing that you are living authentically. As you continue on this path, you will begin to notice something profound. You are no longer participating in the collective madness. You are no longer reacting to the noise. You are no longer driven by the fear and conformity that once held you captive. You have transcended the need for the crowd. You are free. This is the quiet revolution. It cannot be televised. It cannot be weaponized. It cannot be controlled. It begins with questions. It deepens with truth. And it ends, not with conquest, but with liberation. The liberation of your mind, your soul, and your life. So, ask yourself, what kind of world do you want to live in? One ruled by noise, hysteria, and blind obedience, or one where individuals are awake, brave, and sovereign. The choice is yours. It always has been. The world doesn't need more clever followers. It needs conscious leaders. If you choose, you can be one of them. This is the way out, not through panic, but through presence. Not through rage, but through remembrance. And not through escape, but through evolution. Let the madness of the world rage on, if it must. You have found something deeper. You have found yourself. And in doing so, you have already begun the revolution. As we come to the end of this journey, we must look forward, not just backward. The world is changing, and the forces of mass psychosis, fear, conformity, and control are not disappearing. They are evolving, adapting to new forms, new technologies, and new methods of manipulation. The question then is, how do we continue on the path of truth in an ever-changing world? How do we maintain our mental sovereignty when the very nature of the herd is shifting? The answer lies in one simple but profound truth. Truth cannot be manipulated forever. No matter how powerful the forces of delusion become, they are always built on shaky ground. Lies, no matter how convincing, eventually unravel. The structures of mass psychosis are fragile. They are built on fear, on division, on the need to belong at all costs. And these are the very things that truth destroys. But in the meantime, we must remain vigilant. We must continue to ask the hard questions. We must continue to live with the clarity and courage that has brought us this far. We must continue to walk the path of resistance, not through force, but through quiet strength. The forces of mass psychosis want you to believe that you are powerless, that truth is relative, that everything is subjective. But the truth is that you are more powerful than you know. You are the antidote to the collective madness. And by simply living with integrity, by questioning, by standing in your truth, you are already beginning to change the world. The world may try to pull you back into its delusions, to drag you into the chaos and the noise. But remember, you are not alone. There are others, like you, who have begun to awaken. There are others who are searching for the same clarity, the same peace, the same truth, and together, we are stronger. Together, we can form a new community, one built on truth, on questioning, on... This is not a call to arms. It is a call to evolution. The future of humanity is not written in the chaos of the present. It is written in the quiet, steady progress of individuals who choose to see, to question, to awaken. It is written in the lives of those who refuse to surrender their minds to the illusions of the crowd, who choose to walk in truth even when the world seems lost in delusion. The way forward is not through rebellion or revolution in the traditional sense. It is through evolution, the evolution of the individual mind, the evolution of society's collective consciousness. It is the evolution of truth itself. So, ask yourself once again, what kind of world do you want to live in? One where you are controlled by fear and conformity, or one where you stand in your own truth, free and unshaken? The choice, as always, is yours. The time for change is now. The path is clear. Walk it.